Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today's review is going to be on After Hours by Tesfaye, better known as The Weeknd, his 7th full-length project and 4th studio album. The Weeknd is an artist that probably needs no introduction at this point, but I'm going to introduce him. Almost a decade ago now, Abel released his trilogy project in 3 parts, consisting of Thursday, House of Balloons, and Echoes of Silence, all of which were well received and cemented his place in the overall scene that he was trying to get into. With the achievement of trilogy under his belt, Abel has released 3 other studio albums since. Starting off with Kissland, which was a barely notable project for him at the time. A lot of more of the same. It did have his second Drake feature ever though, which just further cemented him in the mainstream. The 2 albums since then though are what made him into a household name, with Starboy being released 4 years ago now. Tracks like Can't Feel My Face, Earned It, the title track off of Starboy, all smash hit songs that just further brought his name up. At this point, the Weeknd formula is something that most people are going to be familiar with after even hearing a couple of Abel songs. It's a very spacey, druggy atmosphere, suitable for both a chill-out session and a party. Talking about doing drugs, fucking bitches, getting money, trap shit. Nothing too deep, but something atmospheric and enjoyable. But going into this album cycle, it was clear that we were going to get something a little bit different this time around. Something a little bit more experimental. Not that his sound wasn't already a little bit experimental, something that definitely changed the mainstream in a lot of ways. We never really have seen something in the way of a concept album from Abel. And when we started getting this very vintage 80s aesthetic, along with some somewhat conceptual lyrics on the singles leading up, these tracks gave people the idea that we were going to get somewhat of a concept album from Abel this time around. And while those suspicions are not really right or wrong, I would say they're probably more right than they are wrong. On this album, we have a pretty clear narrative. I just don't know that I'd call it a story. We have Abel lyrically at his most emotional and confessional all throughout this thing, which is really cool to see. On the 2 opening tracks, Abel lost his girl because he probably cheated, did some very immoral shit, as he talks about in a lot of songs. And this time around, he's actually pretty sad about that. Now, on any other Weeknd project, you wouldn't really see this kind of attitude. He's usually just talking about being a player and getting as many as possible. We actually see him missing this person and wanting this relationship back. And that's a new angle. Saying it in this way sounds kind of weird to say that it's like a new direction, but it really is in his music. And essentially what we have going on here is themes of being sorry and trying to get this girl back while not really being able to fully, and partying and doing drugs and having the same Weeknd lifestyle to cope with this problem that he's got. And it shows a little bit more insight, and it makes Abel feel like a more relatable character through this narrative. There's a motive, there's a motivation, and it's not just because it's fun. And that makes the narrator of this album a lot more human. But throughout the album, lyrically, he doesn't really go anywhere with this relationship. On the title track, After Hours, we kind of see him maybe getting back together with this girl. It sounds like he wants to take things really seriously, and I feel like it's up to the imagination where this is going to go. Because on our final track, Until I Bleed Out, I feel like this is one of the most important tracks lyrically from The Weeknd. Essentially, this wraps up the deeper thesis of the album. This song comes at the very end of this album talking about how basically he went back on his same bullshit to cope with the situation. And he's saying here that until he bleeds out or until he's dead, this is how he's going to be. This is who he is. This is what he wants to do. So lyrically, that wraps up the whole album really well. Production-wise, I think that this is the best Weeknd album and the worst Weeknd album at a few points. Generally, though, it's the best one. This 80s aesthetic is an interesting risk. While it's really cool on Blinding Lights and everybody was into it on Blinding Lights, it's pretty clear that if you do that on every single track, it's going to get super boring. However, he really doesn't. Although track 3, Hardest to Love, sounds like it could have been a thing in the 80s, it doesn't really beat you over the head with it. And in the first half of the album, that's really, for the most part, what you see. A lot of this vibe comes in on what really ended up being a 2-part saga, Faith and Blinding Lights. And from here on, we see more of this production, In Your Eyes being the clearest example of it. There's a saxophone solo on this, and that's probably one of the riskiest moves I've seen on a Weeknd song. One of the most unpredictable things that happened, but I am jamming out to it every time it comes on. The synth leads on this song, as well as the aforementioned Blinding Lights, of course, are really, really cool. Add a lot of atmosphere and a kind of nostalgic feel to the tracks. And that's something that wouldn't have really been achieved otherwise, so it's really cool that he took this in the 80s synth pop direction that he did for certain tracks, but didn't overuse it. Production-wise, the other most notable one here is Heartless, the lead single from this. This beat slaps, and I cannot stress that enough. Metro Boomin did turn that hoe into a mosh pit. All throughout, though, there's not bad production on this thing. There's no beats on here that I would necessarily go out of my way to avoid and say that they're really generic or bad. Almost everything on here tries something unique. However, the track Snowchild is my most mixed opinion track for a few reasons. One of them being the productions used on here. The trap hi-hats and percussion is very, very noticeable upon listening to this track's instrumental, and the other elements that we have going on here really fall to the back, and really all you kind of hear is these clicking hi-hats, and that's a little bit stale if you haven't heard enough people complain about it already. So instrumentally, I feel like this one could have done a lot to either use better percussion that stands out a lot more, or fill that empty space up. Most of these songs have really, really stellar, spacey, atmospheric beats on them. I cannot stress enough how immersed you will get just upon playing the first track. The way this track builds into that last minute is just wild, and you're instantly just in for the ride. And that's another thing that I would like to mention is how every track on here has such a solid outro. The way that Faith leads into Blinding Lights with the sirens, the way that the opener leads into the second track, and the second track leads into the third track, and I can go on and on and on and on. But all of these tracks flow into each other really well, or they just have a really killer last minute to 30 seconds. A lot of these instrumentals do a lot to build the environment around you and just kind of let you have it at the end. A lot of these are just really, really satisfying listens for that reason. Abel's singing, of course, is stellar across the entire record too. But that really goes without saying. You all know the guy, and you know that he's a good singer. Second problem comes in on tracks that have already given praise to the first 2 tracks. What's the vocal mixing? I've heard some people praise this as it's like some effect or something, like he's trying to sound robotic, but I think it's just done shitty. That's my viewpoint on that mixing. It doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound good to me. I'm sorry. The juxtaposition to Hardest to Love is just so strong that it makes you realize it right away. Like, if the vocals were mixed that way, I would still have a gripe with it across the whole project, but with it just being on those first 2 tracks, it's so ungodly noticeable. And really the mixing across the whole thing is like fine. With a voice like Abel's, I would think that the sound engineers would be able to do a lot more with this than they do, and instead it's pretty much just subpar mixing with some minimal effects thrown on it. Really, yeah, we have the most conceptual album that we've ever gotten under the Weeknd name. Some of the best lyrics and best instrumentals. And really, this is clearly one of Abel's best projects. Overall, I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on this. Let me know what you thought in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions, but that's just about going to wrap it up for this one, and I will see you in the next video. Never need a bitch, I want a bitch need.
I've been dodging death in the 6 speed. Amphetamine got my stomach feeling sickly.